One thing about partnerships as a potential tool for NATO to get global. Just one sentence. That's been an issue that used to be discussed quite widely. I'm sorry. But frankly, what's important here is that NATO partnerships should not change the nature of the alliance. So yes, NATO, while it would remain a defensive alliance, it will continue to have selective global stability or global stabilization responsibilities. And global partnerships, or NATO partnerships as such, could help NATO to get global only in the sense of helping to build elements of cooperative security order going beyond defensive role of the alliance. And two more issues. First, partnership with NATO partnerships with Ukraine and Georgia. The only thing I want to stress here is that in those two cases, in the case of Ukraine and Georgia, we should do everything possible in order to keep the process going on. It's not time to discuss whether and how those nations would decide to join the alliance. But the prospect for that must be kept open, and there is a big value in the process itself. So we have to continue to build partnerships with those nations, and this should be a functional partnership and not just a series of formal meetings and formal discussions. And finally, Russia. Is NATO partnership with Russia possible? And how it should be reflected in the NATO strategic concept? Well, it is possible. Of course it is possible. What we need is a kind of a friendly partnership with Russia and not antagonistic relations. However, what needs to be done is, first of all, that we, the NATO, should look at Russia, at the cooperation with Russia, in a much more realistic manner, less wishful thinking, more realism, and frankly, more pragmatism, and less declarations. What needs to be changed, in my view, on the other side, is the Russian perception of NATO, because we cannot accept Russian, if you wish, obsessions, logic or obsession, about NATO as a tool of US policy, about NATO military infrastructure coming too close to Russia's borders, about NATO which must be Russian enemy. This is a kind of a very biased approach, very biased perception of the alliance, which is unfortunately visible also in the new military doctrine, but actually, everywhere, almost everywhere in Russia. This is a logic which goes like, NATO was established during the Cold War in order to counter the threat from the Soviet Union. Russia is a successor to the Soviet Union. NATO must be enemy of Russia. I'm sorry to say, but this is a kind of logic which reminds me quite famous Latin saying, qui bene bibit bene dormit, qui bene dormit non peccat, qui non peccat sanctus est, ergo qui bibit sanctus est. In loose translation, it would mean he who drinks well, sleeps well. Who sleeps well does not commit sins. Who does not commit sins is a saint person. So, who drinks well is a saint person. This is this kind of logic that has to be changed, because it's a vicious circle. Now, and one more thing, I don't think it would be productive to kind of, to come back to the discussion about so-called promises from the 90s. That Russia is complaining about, that the West didn't keep the word, that NATO would not move eastward, that NATO military infrastructure would not be moved eastward, and there will be no deployments of NATO troops closer to Russian borders, and so on and so on. Once more, in my personal capacity, I'm afraid that what happens here is that actually Moscow had heard in the 90s what it had wanted to hear. Because at the same time, throughout the 90s, there were other messages coming from the West, that whenever it would come to NATO enlargement, all new members will enjoy equal rights, and there will be no kind of two-tier alliance, or the alliance with two categories of membership. But it would not be simply productive to come back to the discussion. What we must focus now is on rebuilding basic trust and confidence in NATO-Russia relations. As that was already raised, we must focus on military predictability, openness, transparency, and actually NRC is a very good tool. There is nothing wrong with the NRC as an institution from the moment of its establishment. What went wrong a few years ago was that there were different intentions on both sides, and the NRC as an instrument was used for different purposes. But structurally, there's nothing wrong with NRC. It's a perfect body. It's just that it needs a kind of a new impetus. I think the new strategic concept should offer kind of re-engagement vis-à-vis Russia, but not a formalistic renegotiation of structures or architecture of NATO-Russia relationship. What we need is a new spirit and not so much new structures. For me, for example, NATO can consider inviting Russian observers to at least some of the alliance's exercises, provided Russia will do the same for the Russian exercises. And what's, from my point of view, most important is that first we should do this, exchange observers, and only then issue a declaration on that event. Thank you very much.